Yeah, we're going to carry on with our series, The Rhythm of Life. We're getting near the end, not of life, but of the rhythm of life. The next two, I'd encourage you to get along or listen online. We're getting to the end of the story, and we're looking at endings. The Bible has got the best story if you're worried about endings. So this series really has been Genesis, and it's been Revelation. So I've been coming here a long time. Paul's going to preach next week. We're going to look at Revelation. Can't wait to hear what we're going to hear from Paul about Revelation. But the Bible's got great news for our endings. The great news that will give us great focus about where we can end up. But now, just now, you're stuck with me, and you're stuck in the middle of life. That's what we're going to think about today. How do we keep our joy? How do we keep our excitement? How do we get up on Monday morning and be full of life in this tricky world that we live in? I don't know if you've been following the Rob Burrows story or if you're familiar with the character Rob Burrows. I'm looking for him. I'm going to go with that. Let's get there's a few nods of heads. If you're not familiar with the story of Rob Burrows, he's a rugby league player, Leeds player, and he was diagnosed with MND, I don't know, maybe about 4 years ago. And he's doing wonderful things. In a week's time, and this is a really, really lovely thing, his daughters are going to push him round a 5K race. And he has described this moment as one of the most joyous moments of his life. We should already be pretty impressed with Rob Burrows. If you're not familiar with him, he's shorter than me. He's about this kind of size. And he's been playing professional rugby league against guys quite literally twice his size for 20 years and making them look silly. He's already an impressive character. But the way that he has held together pain and tragedy and real joy over the last 4 years has captivated us. You'll have watched his documentaries. If you see him interviewed on Look North or something like that, you're captivated because he lives in this reality of real pain and anguish, and yet there's a gorgeous smile on his face, and he can say things like, it's going to be the best day of my life when my 2 girls push me around this 5K, even though I can't move myself. And we look on in awe at this because we know the reality of life is to live in a world that can crush us, where there's so much horror and terrible stuff happening, where the reality of human life is really tough, where we could get some really bad news tomorrow, or our job might be rubbish, or we might be getting bullied, or whatever else, and yet hold on for joy. Hold out for joy. It can break us. It can crush us, the reality that at any point we can encounter real pain and real difficulty. I think it's a deal breaker. And it's a heartbreaker for people who are thinking about faith. If you're thinking about it, if you're really thinking about it, the fact that there can be a good God that brings light and life and joy and makes you think about eternity and makes you sing songs like how did you feel singing those songs? The joyousness with which we can sing those songs and like the certainty that we get to in our heads. And yet at the same time, we hold the reality of teenage cancer, of starvation. People in our world die of lack of food, of genocide. How you hold these things together. Just the other week, I would say, so it was Tuesday night, little personal insight into my life. I would say I'm going well with my faith at the moment. It means the world to me. I might self-identify as strong. I believe it all. I really believe it. I really believe there's a God that looks out for us. I really believe I've got an eternal security. I really believe that when Jesus died, he died for me. It brings me so much joy and so much hope. And yet, Tuesday night, I switched the news on at 6 o'clock, just before I'm about to run one of my kids down the road to Ackworth to train, and I see that there's been a bomb dropped on a dam in the Ukraine, and hundreds of thousands of people are going to have to live in a flood. And all of a sudden, my world's toppled. It's quite joyous. I think it was quite a sunny day. And it's like the rug was pulled out from under my feet. And there was a threat to the nuclear power station that's just down the road. We are flooding ourselves en masse. We invent an incredible thing like nuclear power, and we threaten to kill ourselves with it. The pain that is always so near. Then I drove down the road, and so that's a big thing. So big things grab us, and we recognize the pain that we're in. And then do you get this? Tiny things unseat you. Now, it might be me. It might be that my blood sugar was low. I might not have had enough sleep. But I was driving along, taking one of my kids to training, and a youth, let's call him a youth, came out of an offie with a can of Coke, took one sip like this, like quite nonchalant. It was initially quite cool, and then just flung it into a bush. Like just the whole can into a bush. It's not even a thing, is it? It's not a big deal at all. And yet my child that was in with me was like, Dad, what's up? And those little two things, like insignificant little things, toppled me. And I got to a place, next 20 minutes, I'm driving over to Ackworth. I'm thinking, what's the point? I can get quite down. In this moment, I got quite down. I'm thinking, what's the point? What's the point in me holding out for God's good news? What's the point in me preaching on Sunday? I was thinking that. What's the point in me hoping that the good in the world is going to outnumber the bad? We get to these sort of places. I think, is it just me? Do you get to these kind of places where you're thinking, crikey, there's so much rubbish going on? To flourish in life, to have really good lives, we've got to live here. We've got to be able to exist here. What does Mr. Kipling say? His wise poem. If you can meet triumph and disaster and treat them the same, the world's yours, my son, and everything that's in it. He's hit the nail on the head. If we can live in this zone, if we can exist here with tragedy down the road over our shoulders in the next few years and joy holding out for it in our hearts, I hope that good things happen. I know that good things can be in store. If we can stay there, and Kipling says that the world's ours, and Jesus says that the world's ours. In this world you'll have trouble, Jesus says. Take heart. You're going to be all right. I've overcome the world. Paul says, I've learned the secret of being content. I've learned what it is to have nothing, and I've learned what it is to have everything. And I can exist in a space that brings me joy. Much misquoted, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Jesus is speaking to some of his followers in this text that we're going to look at. Followers who've experienced life's joys. The joys of being with the miracle maker. The joys of being with this guy, Jesus, who's turning the world on its head. The joys of being alongside Jesus as he performs miracles. And yet, Jesus speaks to them knowing the pain that is coming for them. Not just the pain because he's going to leave and they're going to be exposed on their own, but just the pain of being alive. He knows the tension that we live in. And I don't know how closely you read the text. By the way, I picked this. It's about judgment. I picked it. I could have picked something else, but I picked this. Jesus says to them, there's some things that you need to know. One of them, this is how I describe it. One of them you're not going to be able to stomach. You're just not going to be able to stomach it. It's going to cause you consternation. And one of them you're not going to be able to do. 2 points in this sermon. One of them you're not going to be able to stomach. One of them you're not going to be able to do. But both, Jesus says to these people who are living on the edge, who are going to face strife and pain and want to hold out for joy, you're going to have to know this. There's some things that we're going to have to know if we want to live and live life to the full. And the first one is just about as tricky a thing that you get to say when you're a preacher. And it's just about as tricky and as horrible a thing as you get to hear when you sit in a church. You should be super uncomfortable. I don't know. Sometimes it's possible to zone out, isn't it, when the Bible reading comes on? But if you're consuming what is up on that screen, then this should, if you're coming along to church, you're at least interested. You probably buy into it. It should really cause us consternation. First thing Jesus says we need to hold on to is the fact that justice and judgment comes. Justice and judgment comes. Verse 31 to 34, read it out. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, so just try and fashion this for yourself. Just try and wrestle with it. What is he saying? Jesus, if you can, just to give you some context, it's the end of Matthew's gospel. It's the end of his story in terms of his life. He's going to the cross. When the Son of Man comes in glory, these are his parting words, in a sense. One of his last parables, some commentators describe bits of this as a parable anyway. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he'll sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on the right and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." Now, the text goes on, and there's a message for the goats. We've not got it in the text, but it's not nearly as pleasant. Jesus speaks of an ultimate future reckoning. He talks about a time when all nations, all people gather together, and there is a king there. There is somebody with the authority and the job and the qualities, there's maybe other ways to say it, but to sort everything out, to bring justice. And the picture that we get is of sheep and goats, of a shepherd who can separate out sheep and goats. Now, this is there's not many farming analogies that really resonate that as strongly as maybe they would have done in Bible times. But this one maybe is a bit more distant. But the idea of seeing a shepherd separate out sheep and goats would be really familiar to first century listeners. Goats and sheep. And if you've been to some parts of the world, actually, you'll see goats and sheep mixed together. And over here, they look very different, don't they? You can spot them a mile off. But in other cultures, the sheep are a lot skinnier, and you can't separate them out. You can't quite see them. The picture here is of a shepherd who's got all this mash of sheep and goats, and he's able to just look at them for the good of the flock. The story would go in ancient times, the male goats were too enthusiastic with their procreation. That's the story. You needed to get, if you just think about that for a second, the penny will drop, and they needed to get some of them out of the herd. The shepherd would separate them all out. This is the story that we're looking at. There is assessment, and there is an assessor. There's separation, and there's a separator. There's judgment, and there's a judge. And if you're sat there now, just dead happy with everything that I've just said, then you're probably not listening. Or maybe you're not thinking about it very seriously. This is a huge problem. This causes my heart to ache. This wakes me up in the middle of the night when I think about people that I love and people that I don't love, people that I wish ill. This wrestling match of an ultimate judgment. It's a huge problem. And it's been too big of a problem for us, probably for the last couple of 100 years. One of the conclusions that we've come to, and we've come to this in a pretty big way, is that there can't be a God. There can't be a good God and judgment. Those two things can't come together. You can maybe have judgment and a bad God, but you can't have a good God and judgment. So the outcome of our thinking as human beings, largely, and it ebbs and flows, doesn't it? There's no God. There's no ultimate authority, and there's no judgment that sits over us. There's no future ultimate justice that's coming. And we live now, and there's various different ways to describe this, but one of the ways that we've come to understand it for the last couple of 100 years is that we say we live in relative times. One of the concepts and the phrases that we repeat over and over again is that it's all relative. And actually, as society and as culture, we've breathed this huge big, particularly in the 60s, I noticed, we've breathed this huge big sigh of relief. Because we've said to ourselves, there's no definitives, there's no absolutes. We're at freedom now, and we're at liberty to do whatever we want. Except, and if you read philosophy, I'm sure you all read philosophy. If you read philosophy, the philosophers are already saying this. None of us are going to read the philosophers for about 300 years till they're all dead. Then we'll read them in the textbooks, and then we might take them seriously. But for now, we won't read them. But they are saying it. if it's all relative, then no one has the right to say anything's right or wrong. Nobody can pin that down. No one's got the right. Who can say what's right and wrong? If it's all relative, if we're just the consequence of a ball of gas, if that is all that it is, if it's survival of the fittest, then nobody can say this is definitely right or this is definitely wrong. And the thing is, we do. We do say things are right and wrong. We see abuse. We see genocide. We see cannibalism. And we don't go, oh, that's interesting. They're working it out their own way, the cannibals. They're an interesting bunch, aren't they, the cannibals? We don't say that, do we? We scream. We go, no, that's definitely wrong. And when we scream it's wrong, we don't just do it in ones and twos, and we don't internalize it. It's not just something we've reasoned out for ourselves. The appeal that we make is to a higher external point of justice that we all know about. We say, this is just wrong. And it's wrong. It's not wrong because you think it's wrong or because you think it's right. It's just wrong. There's a baseline, this is just wrong, that we all appeal to. Moral relativism is a motif that we use. But I would counter, we don't really believe it. We don't buy into it entirely. I think it's truer to say there is a right and a wrong. There are some absolutes. There are some things that we look at in life, and even though they make our stomachs churn, and even though there's been abuses in the past with these rights and wrongs, many of them, there's only so far we can run away from them before we go running back and we start screaming and we say, hang on a minute. Don't forget there's right and wrong here. I would say, rather than giving up on any kind of truth altogether, or any kind of justice, or any kind of judgment, I would say that we hold out for it. Not just as Christians in a church today, but as human beings. We don't give up on it. We daren't. We can't. Actually, at the same time as it makes us ache and we shift away from it, we rush back, and we probably rush back to it more. If we say, as we say in this passage, that Jesus is the judge, that's one of the things that this passage, I think, is saying. At the end of all things, the good shepherd will be the judge. If we say that, and I'd encourage you to think about this and look at this, if we stop and we look at the kind of justice that Jesus delivers, and as Protestant Reformed Christians, we look at Jesus and we say, he is the full revelation of God. This is what God has been doing. He is almost the revelation of justice. And if we look at him and we see that, if we see justice in him and we see how he brings about justice, we see the kind of justice that he delivers for the woman that's caught in adultery and everyone wants to stone her. And Jesus says, hang on a sec. Let him without sin cast the first stone. It's just like ridiculously wise, beautiful judgment. When we see the kind of justice that he brings, when we see the way that the disparate world that he existed in and the way that he pulls people back together, we see this beautiful community that Jesus built. We hear him talk about the Good Samaritan and we see him building bridges. When we see the justice that he brings and we realize that he's the judge, here's what I'd say. Rather than our stomachs turning, which they will, to use an old Christian expression, we say, oh man, come Lord Jesus, quick. We're stuck. The other argument that you make in justice is you say, we're arcing towards justice. There's the progress argument. We'll get there in the end. I see a case for that. But I don't think we're ever going to pierce justice. The smarter we get, the more laws we get, the more progress we seem to make. There's still terrible injustices. We don't seem to be ever be able to pierce justice. Justice comes, and I think we ache for it. There's a guy called Albert Camus. I'm just going to quote him. He is a French philosopher, post-Enlightenment. This is his stuff: liberty, freedom, justice. He said this: Absolute freedom mocks at justice. Absolute justice denies freedom. Absolute freedom mocks at justice. Absolute justice denies freedom. To be fruitful, the two must find their limits in each other. In other words, he says, we can't have both of them at the same time. One will run out. We can't have absolute justice and absolute freedom. It just can't happen. We'll have to beat somebody up somewhere, or I'll have to be stricter with the law somewhere. You can't have absolute freedom and absolute justice. And this is what I would say is one of the beautiful things about the story that shapes my life, keeps me going, is that Jesus comes along and he says, you can be absolutely righteous by faith. I have achieved all the legal requirements that you're ever going to need. Justice has been achieved on that cross, complete justice. And you're at liberty to live. I'm going to place the law in your heart and make your life sing. We wait for perfect justice. Second thing that Jesus tells us to hold out for, and it's through verse 34 to 40. He says, hold out for good in the pain, because we've no idea how far our good goes. Hold out for good in the pain. Hang on in there. Keep living. You can flourish, because you've no idea how far your good can go. I don't know if you've seen the film, and I'm from the I say this a lot, that I'm from the 90s, so all my reference points are 90s films. But there was a gorgeous kid called Haley Joel Osment who had piercing eyes, and he was a very serious kid. If you're from my generation, you might remember this guy, and he was in a film called Pay It Forward. I don't know if you've seen Pay It Forward. If you're too young for Pay It Forward, let me just say, just mark it up. It's a gorgeous little film. I talked to Jude before. She said, it's a bit cheesy, Ash. I said, yeah, it's a bit cheesy, but it's a gorgeous film. Essentially, lots of other things go on, but this little kid does something, a tiny little thing that's kind. Somebody's kind to him, and then rather than just pay the thing back to the person that's been kind to him, he pays it forward to a couple of people. And they pay it forward to a couple of people. And there's this beautiful cascade of kindness. By the end of the story, you just see this gorgeous story move out. Loads of people benefit from the kindness. I was inspired by the film. And I used to work in a fairly working class place in Batley. But I just so inspired by the film. Next day I got up, I thought I'm going to try paying it forward. So I bought a guy at the chip shop where I go chip butty. Just quite random. He was very like the whole thing was very disturbing. I was on fire. Paying it forward, this is the way to go. Just this random guy, I'm just going to buy you a chip butty. He looked terrified. He finished his chip butty. He couldn't take his eyes off me. I think he thought I was going to rob him or do something else to him. And I finished it with what I would call a butty burp. You maybe know what a butty burp is. And I thought to myself, that's the end of the chain right there. My kindness has stopped with that burp. It's going no further. It's a short chain. I think, and that moment, daft as it sounds, represents how it can be to try and be good, to try and hold on for good and do good things in the world that we live in. We know kind actions can change the world. We know how amazing it is to do good. But actually, we live in a world that asks loads of us and challenges us all the time, and it's hard to keep that up. And some of the good things we do just feel futile. Just feels like the kind actions, the goodness that we dish out just drifts up into thin air. It evaporates. Jesus is addressing his followers, and it's a beautiful little address that he makes. Just read along with me, verse 34 to 40. And just picture there, this is the crowd that follow Jesus are an eclectic bunch. You've got teachers, you've got leaders, you've got wealth, you've got real poverty, you've got real broken people. It's a gorgeous, wonderful, eclectic bunch. Jesus says, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Because I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will say back to him, almost, are you kidding? Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you? You've been looking after us. Or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in? Or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? Then Jesus utters this pearl. The king will reply, I tell you, whatever you did for the least of one of these, you did for me. Whatever you did for the least of these, you did for me. Jesus gives this appeal, aware of this eclectic bunch, this beautiful story, aware of the significance of this crowd, these rich people, these leaders, these teachers, these people that with nothing, aware of his imminent departure, aware that they're soon going to face real pain, aware that the good works that have manifest amongst this bunch, pulling in the poorest of society, this wonderful story, that when the hard times come, they're going to be the things that go. The poor in the group, the Christians that got stuck in prison, the Christians with nothing to eat, the Christians that haven't got any money. What's going to happen is, when the tough times come, this wonderful, organic, gorgeous crowd that we've got that's changing the world, that looks incredible, the good works will cease, they'll slow down, and the broken will suffer. And Jesus says to them, when I'm not here anymore, you need to know something. Your conduct, your character, your view of people with nothing, your view of your ability to do good, it's not just for this day on this earth. This is connected to your eternal future. This is connected to your relationship with me. And it's half an inspirational pep talk, and it's half a theology lesson. And Jesus says to them, whatever small, mundane, tiny things you do for the least important person in this room, you do for me. You do like I'm still here. You do like we're carrying on this kingdom work that looks beautiful, that people can't get enough of. If you're doing something like that for me, even if it's tiny, even if it looks completely insignificant, even if nobody else sees the chip butty that you buy for the guy down the street, nobody else clocks that. Even if nobody else sees that you've just bitten your tongue when you really should have just let rip. Jesus says, that kind of action, tiny and insignificant as it is done for me. When it's done in my name, when it's done inspired by me, it echoes into eternity. It lasts forever. Even in the rubbish, doing the tiniest of things, our good works carry on. I think Jude said it in the podcast last week. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is wasted in Jesus' name. How do we know? How can we be sure about that? Because Jesus goes to the cross, and he doesn't go for the rich and famous, although they're covered. He goes to the cross even if just one nobody needed saved. And when he comes off that cross, as we know now, because there is a church that is alive and well, everybody benefits. Everybody feels that spark. There's hope for everybody. Listen, tomorrow morning you'll forget the sermon and you'll feel like giving up again. Somebody will annoy you on the way to work. You'll have a low blood sugar level like me. You'll have not got enough sleep. And you'll think, do you know, what is the... Should I hold on for this? Should I grab hold of this message, this good news? Should I have joy in my heart? Should I let myself dare to think that God loves everybody? Should I let myself dare to think that I'm going to have an eternity in heaven? Should I be inspired by that? When I sing these songs, this next song that we're going to sing, should I just let my heart go for it? Should I scream it out and embrace all of the truth in it? I daren't, because the world's so rubbish. Jesus says to us, hang on. You can hold on. You've got no idea how far these little good things that you do go. Hold on, he says. Hold on. Justice is coming. And it's not just some guy who's going to beat you up. It's the perfect judge. And you're going to need him. Hold on.